Israel, a small state bordering the Mediterranean Sea, is not yet 45 years old. But the history of its people goes back to ancient times. In this area of the Middle East, powerful civilizations had their hour of glory before falling into decline. Here, some of the world's biggest religions were born. But all these events were accompanied by violence and war, of which the Jewish people had more than its fair share. All through history, it's been persecuted and oppressed. Jewish temples were destroyed, rebuilt, and destroyed again. During the Roman occupation, Jews became scattered all over the world, and in the following centuries, Palestine slowly came under Arab influence. After World War I, Palestine was ruled by the British, and in 1947 the United Nations proclaimed the partition of Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state for the Palestinians. But the Arabs rejected the UN resolution, and in 1948, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt prepared for war. They surrounded Palestine, waiting for the last British soldier to leave. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declares the independence of the new state of Israel. For the Jews, an old dream comes true at last. But for the Arabs, this only means one thing: war. Soon the festivities give way to a much more cruel reality. The neighboring countries start the attack, and the young state of Israel experiences its first war. At that time, the Israeli Air Force didn't exist, and the Arabs hoped to destroy the Jewish state before it could form a powerful and efficient army. Most countries refused to sell military equipment to Israel, and while Egyptian Dakotas and Spitfires were strafing Tel Aviv, Israel's defense consisted of only a few anti-aircraft guns and light civilian aircraft. It was obvious that an air force was needed, and Israel tried to acquire warplanes in any way possible. Junkyards were scoured for remains of World War II planes. An imaginary film society bought warbirds for the making of an imaginary war film, and so on. The pilots were Jews who'd served in the RAF during World War II or volunteers from abroad. One of the first aircraft purchased by the IAF was the Avia S-199, which was in fact a Czechoslovakian rebuilt Messerschmitt 109 equipped with a different engine and propeller. These modifications made the Avia as dangerous for its pilot as for its enemy, and the S-199 was soon nicknamed Mezek, which means mule. Other planes were bought in Czechoslovakia, such as the Spitfire Mark 9. The black aircraft was the personal mount of Chaim Weizmann, the future commander-in-chief. But it was the P-51 Mustang that was to become the standard fighter of the IAF until 1953, when Israel entered the jet age by acquiring the Gloster Meteor. In '56, one of these Meteors won the first all-jet dogfight in the Middle East by shooting down an Egyptian Vampire. 1954 marked the beginning of the French period for the IAF, when the Dassault MD-450 Ouragan was bought, soon followed by the Mystère 4A.
I believe that the Mystère was the backbone of the Israeli Air Force. On the Mystère, we learned the meaning of jet aviation. We understood the meaning of flying a jet, because this was an aircraft that does not forget. The American aircrafts, the advanced aircraft, they do forget. They do forgive you, not forget, forgive you. You do a mistake, the aircraft forgives you. On the Mystère, no forgiveness. So you had to fly 100%. This was an aircraft that served in the Israeli Air Force for so many years, and most of the fighter pilots of the Israeli Air Force who flew the 15, 16, Phantom, etc., all of them flew the Mystère. So the Mystère has a special place in every pilot's heart.
By the time the Suez campaign started, the IAF was no longer a small group of mercenaries and adventurers, but a first-class air force. Its pilots were well trained and flew modern jet fighters, but their number was still too limited. However, the first raid of the Suez campaign was not led by jets, but by the good old Mustang. On October 29, 1956, 4 P-51s penetrated Egyptian territory at extremely low level, cutting telephone cables with their propellers. Their action made a surprise attack possible. C-47s, escorted by Ouragans and Mystères, dropped paratroops who cleared the way for the army forces. A few days later, the Sinai was conquered and the blockade of Eilat, the only Israeli port in the Red Sea, was raised. In the meantime, the French and British forces fought for the domination of the canal. The war lasted only 9 days. An ultimatum of the superpowers forced France and Great Britain to withdraw their troops. Under the close surveillance of UN forces, Israel withdrew from Sinai. After the war, a real arms race took place in the Middle East. The Arab countries were strongly supported by the Soviet Union, who'd already sold them MiG-15s. However, the MiG appeared to be inferior to the Mystère 4 in air-to-air combat. It was replaced by the MiG-17 Fresco. With the Fresco, which flew higher, faster, and outclimbed the Mystère 4, the Arabs caught up their technological gap. And the MiG-19 Farmer, Sukhoi Su-7 fitter, and this British Hawker Hunter made things even worse for Israel. But the plane that really upset the balance was the MiG-21 Fishbed. Especially designed as an air superiority fighter, the Fishbed outperformed all aircraft of its generation. The 10 years that followed the Sinai crisis saw the passing of the IAF's last piston-engined aircraft, which were progressively replaced by the Ouragan, Mystère, and this Super Mystère B-2, an advanced supersonic version of the Mystère 4. The Mosquitoes were replaced by Sud Aviation Vautour. 4 of them, like this Vautour 2BR, were destined for reconnaissance and bombing missions, but most of them were A models, highly effective for ground attacks. In 1962 began the delivery of a new fighter that would mark the history of the IAF. The Mirage 3C was at that time one of the most advanced aircraft in the West and had been chosen by the Israelis to face the MiG-21. In the years 1966 to 1967, tension rose once again in the Middle East. The Arab countries started an anti-Zionist campaign. They tried to provoke Israel, and the media called for a holy war to push the Jews back to the sea. Syria and Egypt massed troops at the frontiers, and President Nasser expelled the UN observers from the Sinai. The Arabs were ready to attack. In the meantime, Israel mobilized its reserve troops and waited. Tension was so high now that the slightest incident would cause an explosion. On June the 5th, 1967 at 7:45, 180 fully armed jets took off for a surprise attack on the Egyptian air bases. The Israeli government realized that the chance of surviving a coordinated attack led by the more powerful enemy was nil, and decided that the attack was the best defense.